This is Gemara in Kesubos, the Daf Sadi. We're holding in the bottom of Peites Amid Beis by the Mishnah. And we begin today with the Mishnah that teaches us Shnei Gittin u Shnei Kesubos Goyve Shnei Kesubos. What is the story if a woman shows up to Bezdin, she has 2 Gittin and 2 Kesubos? The halacha is Goyve Shnei Kesubos. She collects twice. But what happens if Shnei Kesubos, she has 2 Kesubos, V'get Echad, and only 1 get, oy ksuba ushnei gittin, or she has 1 ksuba and 2 gittin, oy ksuba v'get, or she has 1 ksuba and 1 get, umeisa, and she has edim saying, the simple explanation over here is edim saying that her husband died. In any of these cases, einoy goyve ella ksuba achas. In these cases, she only collects 1 ksuba. So if she has 2 gittin and 2 ksuba, she gets twice. She has 1 get and 1 ksuba and 2 get, 1 ksuba, 1 get and 1 edima misa, then she only collects 1 time. What's the reason? Because we assume that any time a man divorces his wife and remarries her, he does so on the assumption of the original get. So let's see one Rashi over here. The Rashi explains that the Rashi's 5 lines into the white lines, Ksuba Shnei Gittin, Ksuba B'Nisuin Arishainim, V'Girsha, V'Echzira. Anytime there's 1 Ksuba and multiple Gittin, we assume what happened. They got married with a Ksuba. They got divorced, and then they got remarried. And he didn't write her a second ksuba, and that's why she only has 1 ksuba. So in these cases, what does she collect? She only collects 1 time. Why does she only collect 1 time? Because we assume that the second marriage was done on the assumption of the first ksuba. So says the Gemara, what is the story when there are 2 ksubas and 1 get? The case that we just spoke about, in which we said she only collects 1 time. Says the Gemara, Ibai Bahai Gavya, Ibai Bahai Gavya. The question is, which does she collect with? If she wants to collect, she collect with the original ksuba, or, this is discussing a case in which there are 2 ksubas and 1 get. As the Mishnah told us, Shtei ksubas v'get echad, that case you also only collect once. So says the Gemara, if she wants, she could collect with the original ksuba. If she wants, she could collect with the second ksuba. So it sounds like she gets only 1 ksuba, but which one? Whichever one she wants. Asks the Gemara, the Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. This is seemingly a kasha on Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. Shnei sharos hayotzim zecher zeh bitel sheni as arishain. That Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel says that whenever we have 2 subsequent documents, we assume the second one nullifies the first one. And if in our Mishnah we're saying that it does not nullify, the latter ksuba does not negate the former ksuba, but rather she can collect from either one, that seemingly is not like Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. Explains the Gemara, Lavit Mar Allah, 2 lines from the bottom. Do we not learn Amar Abba Mother Rav Nachman the Oiseba Diklul Tesefes Kasva Hachanami B'Daisiv La, that in a scenario where the second document has a bit more, if there's an extra palm tree, he wrote it on as a Tesefes. So too, the case in our Mishnah that we're talking about, in which we could collect from either of the Ksubas, is when the second one is more, and therefore we assume that they added on in the second ksuba, and not necessarily is it going to be mevatel the first one, and that's the reason why Ibai Bahai Gavya, because she can collect from whichever one that she wants. Tanu Rabbanan, says the Gemara in the last line, Oitzia Gatu Ksuba Misa. Quoting the case in the Mishnah, what is the story if she has all 3? She has a get, she has a ksuba, and she has edim showing that her husband died. As we turn over to Daf Sadi Amid Aleph, the top line, Im get kodim l'ksuba, kodim shtei ksubos. Says the Brisa that if the get comes before the ksuba, what does that show us? That shows us that he wrote a second ksuba when they got remarried. Then kodim shtei ksubos. then it shows there were two different things. She's holding a get and a ksuba. So if the get is dated earlier and the ksuba is dated later, obviously what happened? There was an original marriage that resulted in this get, and then there was a second marriage, which is this ksuba. So in that scenario, she could collect two ksubas. But ksuba kedemis the get in a govel ksuba achas. But if the ksuba comes before the get, then says the Mishnah, she's only going to be able to collect one ksuba. Why? As we saw in the Mishnah, so the Bryce is adding on a detail to the Mishnah that if the ksuba is dated after the get, then she does indeed collect, or could indeed collect, I should say, two ksubas. We continue with the Mishnah on Daf Sadi Amar Aleph. Says the Mishnah, Katan sheyisiu aviv ksubasai kayames. If we have a child that was married off by her father, and what happened, by his father, and then he becomes a gadol. What's the story with the ksuba? Says the Mishnah, ksubasai kayames, the ksuba that the father wrote for his son while he was a katan stands when they stay married into when he is a gadol. Shamanaskin kaima, because it is on that intention that this boy stays married to this woman. Gersh and his gaira ishta imai. Similarly, if we have a ger that his wife becomes a geiris together with him, so in either scenario, whether it's a child that stays married to his wife after becoming a gedailah, or whether it's a ger that stays married to his wife after them both converting, in both cases, the ksuba that was either written while he was a katan or while he was a guy stands now that they stayed married. Says the Gemara, Amar Ravuna Loishon Almanu Masayim. Says Ravuna an important thing, that when do we say in the Mishnah that ksuba sakayames? That's only the original ikr ksuba mana or Masayim. Avol Taisefes Ema. But says Ravuna, the Taisefes, if there's any additional amount that was written into the ksuba, that amount does not stay after they stayed married when this boy becomes a gadol or after they converted. Rav Yehuda says Rav Yehuda, no, the ksuba is 100%, whether it was a ksuba written while they were a katan, or whether it was a ksuba written while they were goyim, either way it stands. Says the Gemara, let's figure out if this is true. Ask the Gemara, Meisvei. Chitshu, Naitelis Masha Chitshu. Says the Braisa, they asked Rav Yehuda, Chitshu, if after they became a gadol, if after they became Yidin, Chitshu, they added a new mount onto the ksuba, Nitla Masha Nitlu. Then what happens? Nitlu, Masha Nitlu, they could take what they added. So for this Braisa, what do we see? Chitshu in, Loi Chitshu Loi. Says the Braisa that only if they were mechadish, if this person added on to the ksuba, then they get the extra. But loy chechulai. So we have a kasha on Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda said afilu taisefes yeshla. But we see from this Braisa they only get the taisefes when it was added on when they were a gadol, or when they were added on the amount when they were yidden. Says the Gemara, Ema Avsh Mashachetchu. No, change the Braisa means even that which they added aside for the original Taisefes. Ask the Gemara, what second? But it doesn't say that, because the Braisa says, meaning sometimes with one word we could change the whole Braisa, but sometimes the Braisa is absolutely clear what it means. So over here it's clear that it means that you get to the ikr, or you get the bit that was added on after they became a gadol or yid. Tiyofta, the Rav Yehuda, Tiyofta. Says the Gemara, it's true. This is a kasha on Rav Yehuda. Now the Gemara just explains how did Rav Yehuda make this mistake. Explains the Gemara, Masnita not to say Rav Yehuda was tricked, or was caused to make a mistake by the Mishnah. He thought that when the Mishnah said Kesubos Kayamis, it's going on everything. It's really only going on the Ikar Ksuba. And therefore, not like Rav Yehuda thought that they even keep the Tosefes. Hadron halacha kosev leishto, perhaps a bit of a difficult parak, but everything is always based on Chazara. We should do a Chazara on this 9th parak of Kesubos, as we now go headstrong into the 10th parak of Kesubos. Begins the Mishnah, Misha Yanasui Shtei Nashim. Says the Mishnah, now we're going to discuss who gets priority in a Kesuba when we have multiple wives, and the estate that is left over is not necessarily large enough to pay both. So someone that is married to 2 women who mays, and the husband dies, so he leaves over an estate. The problem is the estate is not large enough to pay both of these Kesubas. Says the Mishnah, the first wife who had a lien, who is obligated to receive her ksuba, comes first to the second wife, as well as the children of the first wife come before the second wife. Nasa Rishayna Umesa, says the Mishnah, a different case. What happens if a man marries a woman and she dies? Nasa Shniya Umesu, then he marries a second woman and then he dies. Then the reverse is true. In that scenario, the second wife comes before the first wife. Because the second wife was the last married woman, meaning she was married to this man and then he died. So therefore, while the second wife was alive, therefore she comes first, because they're coming to collect as Bali Chayv, because they're owed the money. Whereas the first wife is coming to collect as a Yairish. This is going to be an important detail to always have to keep in mind. Why is one coming to collect? If they're coming to collect as a Baal Chayv, as a creditor, that often gives them the upper hand than if someone's just coming to collect as a Yairish. Because of course, one first has to pay off his debts before the Yerusha kicks in. So says the Gemara, Midiktani, for the fact that the Mishnah says, Rishani Kodems the Shniya, says the first comes before the second, and it does not say in the Mishnah that the first one gets and the second one does not get. It sounds like optimally the first one comes first, the second one comes second. But what if the second one grabs before the first one? Sounds like he'll be able to keep it. Shema Mina, and from this is a proof. This would be a proof that a latter Baal Chayv, a latter creditor, who usually does not collect before the former creditor, but if the latter creditor took matters into his own hands, dove in and took something on his own, Masha Gava, from our Mishnah would be a proof that which he collects, and he's able to keep it. Answers the Gemara, 3 lines from the wide lines. It's not a diak from the Mishnah. Really, I'll tell you, if a latter creditor grabs, he does not keep it. And what does it mean in the Mishnah when it says that the first comes before the second has priority? Ligamri katani. It doesn't just mean it has priority. It means they have total first dibs. That even if the second one were to grab, the first one would still win. Kiditinan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Ben Koidin Labas, as we learned in the Mishnah, the same terminology, it says that a son comes before the daughter, and over there we know that it doesn't just mean come before that the daughter could grab. The son is absolute rights first. So too in our case, even though it says the word koidemes, it doesn't just mean that if the second one takes matter into his own hand, they'll win, but rather it's absolute priority to the first one. And therefore there is no raya that a latter Baal Chayv can take matters into his own hands. A second lashon in the last narrow line. The Mishnah did not say if the second one grabs, we do not take away from him. And this lashon is going to be the opposite. We're going to take it away from him. So if a raya, that which the latter one takes, he cannot keep. As we see from the Mishnah, we will not let him keep it. Tananami, as we turn over to Sadi Amid Beis, Harishaina Kaidames Lisheniya. But there's going to be no raya from the Mishnah. And we continue, Nasas Rishaina, quoting the second case of the Mishnah, that he married the first woman. And who died? She died. Then he married the second woman, and then he died. And we said that the second wife comes first because she's collecting with the power of a Baal Chayv. She's collecting and she was owed the money because she was married to this man when he died. Whereas the first woman and her children are only collecting Mikayach Yarshim. Says the Gemara, Shema Mino Tlas. From this Mishnah, we can learn 3 dinim. And these 3 dinim are going to be extensively discussed for the rest of today and tomorrow's daf. Shema Mina, number 1, Number 1, we learn this entity called Kesubos min Indichrin, this concept that the male children always get a part of the Kesuba. This is whether the husband is alive or not. There is a concept of the male children receiving their property of their mother. And we are not worried that it's an elite fighting. Mimai. Where do we learn this first day from? As we learned to the Mishnah, the second woman and her heirs and their children, your Yarshim, come before the first one. Same diak as we saw a moment ago. So we see that they just come first. Ha'ika shakli. But if there's going to be enough, if there is a sufficient estate, then not only would the second wife and her kids get, but the first wife and her kids would get as well. So we see that the first wife's kids, even though the first wife is no longer, would get from this estate. So we see that Achaz B'chayev, Achaz B'maised is the concept of Kesubos min Indichrin. Ushma Mina, number 2, Kesubos nasa Maisel Chaverta. We see that one Kesuba could be considered the excess, the surplus for his friend. Mimai. From where do we see this? It does not say in the Mishnah that you only get if there is a Meiser dinner. It says that in all scenarios that the first wife could come to collect. So seemingly the reason is that when the second wife collects, that's considered that there is a surplus, that there is an excess, and then the first wife and their children could collect, and that would suffice for the din that you always need to have a Meiser dinner in the estate. Ushma Mina, number 3, Kesubos min Indichrin, Loitarfa mimish abdi. We see that the male kids do not get from encumbered properties, do not get from the properties that the father sold. Because if you're going to get from the chassid mishubadim, then the second kid should just come and grab from the first kids. Because the first kid's properties are mishubid to the first kids should come and grab from the second kids because the properties are mishubid to the first kid's estate. So seemingly, we see that you do not collect Kesubos min Indichrin from nechasim mishubadim. 3 dinim that we learn out from the second part of our Mishnah. So Maskiv lo Ravashi asks Ravashi on 2 of these dinim. Mimai, from where do you know that the first din that you just said, the first din being Achaz B'chayev, Achaz B'maised, is the din of Kesubos min Indichrin? Where do you know that is true? Tell me, Achaz B'chayev, Achaz B'maised, Kesubos min Indichrin. My koidmin lenachla katani. And what it mean koidmin in Mishnah lenachla katani? Then when the Mishnah said that the second one and their wives comes first over the first wife, lenachla katani, it's only learning that it has priority over the nachala of the estate. What do we need the first guy's estate involved at all? Similar answer, like we saw on the bottom of the Almid, as we turned over to the top of the Almid, that maybe only said the word kaidmin for the rest of the Mishnah. And furthermore, Rav Ashi asked, and the fact that you asked that one ksuba could become a meiser, could be considered the surplus of the other ksuba. Really, I'll argue with you. But in this case, maybe I'll explain to you, there happened to have been a meiser dinner. There happened to have been an extra dinner, and that's the reason why the first Yarshim get to collect. But if there was no meiser dinner, they would not collect. So don't learn out and deduce from the fact that the Mishnah said that the first kids get that the second kid's estate is considered a meiser dinner. No. Maybe it just referring to a case in which there happened to have been a meiser dinner. Says, so those are the 2 kashas of Rav Ashi. The Gemara takes a moment and pulls over to the side a little bit 5 lines into the white lines. This din, this first din that we're learning out from our Mishnah, this din that when both wives die, one during the husband's lifetime, like we saw in the Mishnah, and one after his death, says the Gemara, this din in reality is machlokes tanoim. The Tanya learned in a brayso mezu achas b'chayav achas b'moise benanos oimer. The second kids can tell the kids of the first kids, can tell the second kids, take your mother's chayv and get out of here. No, it already fell in front of both of them. So what is this machlokes benanis and Rav Akiva? My love, al kamifki the mars avachs b'chayvachs b'moise yesh like Kesubos v'nindechron. Mars avachs b'chayvachs b'moise yesh like Kesubos v'nindechron. So says the Gemara, this din that you're trying to deduce from the Mishnah is seemingly a previous machlokes Tanakama and Rav Akiva, that the Tanakama is going to hold that achas b'chayvachs b'moise there is a din of Kesubos v'nindechron, that the first wife kids will always have a right to collect. Whereas Rav Akiva is going to hold, no, there's no din in lam Kesubos v'nindechron. The first wife's kids will not be able to collect. Amar Rabba says, Rabba, we're 10 lines into the white lines. The first word on the line is B'moisa. He says, Rabba, Ashradinu l'Rabbanan devei Rav, D'yasvi kamri d'kul yamach zavchav d'yishav Kesubos v'nindechron. Says Rabba, that is not the machlokes Tanakama Rav Akiva. Really, I'll tell you that everyone agrees that the first wife's kids could collect, and there's a din of Kesubos v'nindechron, that their kids get the land. And they're arguing about the other din that we spoke about. The machlokes Tanakama and Rav Akiva is whether the ksuba could be considered a meiser, could be considered a surplus, so that the first kids could collect. So explains Rabba, that is going to be the machlokes. The Tanakama is going to hold ksuba nasa meisel chaver, so that one ksuba could yes be considered the surplus for the other ksuba, and that's the reason why the first yarshim could get. Whereas Rav Akiva is going to hold not. V'amina loho, and I, Rabba, told them in the Rabbanan Devei Kasri, I know, but Baal Chayv K'liyam Eloi Pligi Davei Meiser. When it comes to Baal Chayv, there's no machlokes. Ki Plibi B'Ksuba. There's only going to be a machlokes by Ksuba. Maskiv law, Rav Yosef asked Rav Yosef, no way. If the way that you're explaining the machlokes and Rav Akiva, Imer Kvar Kovs Nachla. The wordage in the Bryce is no good. What does Rav Akiva say? Kvar Kovs of Nachla. The Nachla already jumped away from the first wife. That's not what Rav Akiva should have said. Rav Akiva should have honed in on this fact that they're arguing about a Moisa dinner. Says Rav Yosef, it must be like we thought originally, that they're indeed arguing about achas b'chayv, achas b'moisei. And indeed, these Tanoim of our Mishnah are like the Tanoim of the Brisa. The Tanya is learned in a Brisa, Nasas Rishano Mesa, Nasas Shnio Mesu. This Brisa is the same wording as our Mishnah. Rav Shimon, I mean, Misham so my lab, this machlokes Tanakama and Rav Shimon is the machlokes Rav Akiva and is the machlokes Rav Akiva and Tanakama. Meaning the Gemara just proved that it's mistaver, it's logical to say that this is the machlokes of Akiva and the Tanakama, whether there is this concept of achas b'chayav, achas b'moisei, as we have already seen a precedent for such a machlokes. And with this we conclude, says the Gemara, Loi, no, that is not the machlokes. Really, everyone's in a hole that there is Kesubos v'nindechron. We don't have the page in front of us, so let's read a few more lines. The machlokes is going to be about this moiser dinner if it has to be in karka. Mar Sava Tanakama is an old mikarka in metal taloi iloi, or Mar Savar afilu metal taloi iloi. Whereas Rav Akiva is going to disagree. Rav Shimon, is going to disagree, and even going to be work if it's metaltalin. We'll pick up from here in the next year.